Welcome back to the Weekend Surgery. We are currently talking to Professor Angus Dalgleish, Professor of Oncology at St George's University in London. And Rene rightly brought up the COVID vaccine because it would be remiss of us not to talk about that. What you were saying just before the break, Angus, is absolutely fascinating because I found myself, I know regular viewers will know this, I found myself in the middle of this because obviously we were being urged to have the booster vaccines. Now, you were also sort of blackmailed almost into having it because you couldn't travel unless you'd been fully vaccinated and so on. Now, I have a very close family member who Rene knows now, after the booster, got myeloma, and that would then accord with what you're saying about the booster vaccine.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I was doing a melanoma clinic where I had patients who I treated with immunotherapy for years before it became de rigueur, who were doing exceptionally well, disease-free, having been stage 4 for 5 years, one of them was 20 years, and they relapsed. And I'm used to looking at this sort of thing. It's usually excess stress in one's life for several months. There was none of that. And the only thing, doing a Poirot on it, was there anything they'd all had just before the diagnosis? They'd all had an unnecessary booster. And going back to the myeloma, I then had friends, and you mentioned the right scenario, who only had, I told them I didn't think it was wise to have the booster. They only had it. And 2 of them only had it so they could travel for their wives.
And that's what we did, exactly what we did.
Exactly. Now, in both these cases, the people felt awful after having it, and they ended up being very, very unwell. And I insisted they got scanned, and they had bone metastases, one of them from melanoma, one of them from myeloma. And then I found, asking questions, not at work, but amongst my contacts and everybody, I found 8 cases of people who'd had lymphoma or leukemia after the booster. And remember what I said about the booster causes this unnecessary immune suppression of the T-cell response. Well, why would you do that? Now, I must say I'm furious with the MHRA, NHS Witty and all this, that and the other, because this is screaming. And all I was told to do was shut up. I would upset the patients. But when all around the world, my colleagues seeing exactly the same thing, and they were also told the same thing, to shut up and be quiet. This is, I mean, I was carpeted for breaking NHS guidelines. And I said, sorry, the NHS guidelines are completely wrong. I'm a doctor. My first allegiance is to first do no harm.
Exactly.
And I see harm being done by the booster. And as a lifelong scientist, clinical scientist who's been working in developing vaccines for HIV and cancer for years, I know the reason. We have an old adage in our work, as it was, any vaccine that needs a booster doesn't work, certainly for infectious disease. And I think that this proves the case very much here.
Fascinating.
So I do really think that this is wonderful that you've raised this, because so many media will not discuss it. They will not reply, just like the government. I think it needs to be absolutely out there, because we raised the thing about it's not just the vaccine that we have to address, but when you look at the graph, in 1921, the middle of 1921, not only all the clots and the strokes and everything took off, but the cancer incidence started to take off, particularly in the under 50s. And you cannot ignore that. And there's people who've done some wonderful work on this. Carl Hennigan,
yes,
he's a great admirer of the work that he's done. Norman Fenton from the St Mary's, East London, Claire Craig and Ross Jones. They have analysed this, and they have all come to exactly the same conclusions, and I totally support them. And the other thing that we found is that I honestly do believe, and there's an article in the Telegraph today, which is the first time I've seen it really in black and white, said Pfizer lied about the vaccine.
We talked about that right at the beginning of the programme, yeah.
And from my point of view, they basically Pfizer should be held for account. They should be the whole board, CEO, everybody should be held to account for this, and everybody that was involved, because we all know that early VAERS data, that means adverse events to vaccines and reactions, they tried to hide. They tried to hide it for 75 years. It only became available because the High Court judge says, no, I want to see it now. And when we saw it, and these people I've talked to, we looked at it, it was clear if you had an adverse event from the vaccine, which there were far, far more than it ever should have been, you had a 3% chance of dying. If you caught the virus, you had less than a 1% chance of dying. On that data, it should never even have been given an emergency license. It was an absolute disgrace with the manipulation of data and hiding. And I was so horrified by this. I can't believe that people would act like this. It just goes beyond everything.
I mean, I think that's absolutely right. And of course, the public did this because they were being told by medics, by eminent people, you have to get vaccinated. It's the only thing. And as you say, actually, it's coercion. You couldn't actually travel without having that vaccine. So given everything you've said, and you are an eminent man in this field, where do we go from here? What do we need to happen? Does it need to be a public inquiry? Do people need to be held responsible for what they did, for manipulating data, for not giving the public the truth?
Well, I certainly think, I don't know about public inquiries because it looks like a way to push the problem into the long grass, come out with an event 10 years when it's all over. I think there needs to be accountability held. It's clear that we got things that are very wrong. It's clear that the vaccine is still causing problems. And I saw in a clinic this week 2 people present with cancers. Neither of them should have had that again. They both had an unnecessary booster, one of them to travel and the other because they were told they were at risk and they developed these cancers. It is going on. You must banish all these cancers now, vaccines now, because they're doing so much damage. The second thing, we must banish messenger RNA technology because I've told you about how it causes immune suppression, but it gets even worse, and I don't want to go into that. We know enough about messenger RNA technology. They should never be used for infectious disease vaccines. And you have Moderna and Pfizer and all these companies pushing them. It should be banned. Our own government is giving money to Moderna to produce vaccines for the future. And I would never allow messenger RNA vaccines. Some of these people higher up shout at me, what do I know? I'm just an oncologist. Well, unlike them, I can tell you, I sat on the scientific board of a vaccine company that only made messenger RNA vaccines, and I knew then there were insuperable problems in safety, and yet those have been blasted aside. For this
so on that, and I do have to move on, unfortunately, but just on that, basically with the mRNA technology, this is new technology. We hadn't tried it. We had parallel processing in terms of the way the safety data was done. We never do that, ever. And we waived all of these safety protocols to expedite it.
Absolutely. That's what happened.
Angus, really good to talk to you. Actually, I'd love to get you back on another time if we can and to explore this a bit more. Thank you so much for your time, though. That's Professor Angus Dalgleish, who's Professor of Oncology at St George's University in London. He's been shouting about this for a very long time, and he's been shut down.
He has indeed, and that's why we do need to be able to at least talk about it. We might not be right, David, but we need to be able to talk about it. But there certainly are signals, and throughout COVID, just as Angus was, any of us that raised a signal, I raised the myocarditis signal in children, we were shut down.
You know my personal story about that.
Do.
You know, I was there when my mum got myocarditis, and you know, I thought she was coming back from America in a box.
So I think there are 2 messages to take from that. Don't have any more boosters, seems to be the message from Angus, but also don't be obese and eat healthy, not processed.
Very good, Doctor. Thank you very much indeed. Let's take some calls. That was so interesting. Char is in Sussex. Good morning.
Hello. Yeah, I'm hoping you can help me here.
Sure.
We'll try.